and welcome back to another episode of the Big Red with B. Schneid Show. We're in week 2 of fall camp here in Lincoln. I'm joined by the senior sports editor at the Daily Nebraska and one of my coworkers, Anthony Rubek. How you been, Anthony?
I've been good. It's nice, getting back in the swing with Husker football, and I'm excited. It's been an interesting week so far.
Yeah, and Anthony and I also have some exciting content publishing for another source this weekend, so stay tuned for that. Is that your Twitter handle right there in the below? What it
Yes,
is?
that
So be sure
is.
to give them a follow on Twitter and myself, and then shoot us some comments for what you have. But we're going to be diving in. Anthony and I have been at a lot of the media availabilities, and we were also at the Open 1890 practice. So when you look at what you saw from the Open practice, what was your biggest takeaway from what you saw?
Yeah, I thought the open practice was great. It's not a tell-all of what to expect for this Nebraska team this year, but it does give you a great idea, and you really got to see, what players are making the jumps that had been expected from them, and then what players are kind of just, filling into these roles. And the biggest thing that stood out to me, I think, was really the receivers. I mean, Dane Key was on the sideline in the yellow jersey, which we weren't expecting that. So it was very interesting to see who was the guy who filled in his spot. And for that, that was Cortez Mills, the true freshman who has obviously gotten great praise over the spring, over the summer. And he's really kind of worked up his way to be considered in that first unit on offense.
Yeah, you mentioned Cortez Mills. We got to see at the end of practice, he had that 40 or so yard touchdown reception. I think he blew by, it was Amari Sanders, I believe, another Miami dude. But yeah, you mentioned Cortez Mills. We did see the Huskers official Twitter posted that Dane Key was practicing, I believe, yesterday. So he should be good. And it sounded like it was just some soreness he was dealing with. It was more precautionary. But yeah, you mentioned Cortez Mills. Another one that we were talking about sitting there watching was Keelan Smith.
Oh, yeah.
That guy, because earlier in the week we heard from Dykeel Schwartz and Dana Holgerson, and they were talking about, Ja'Cory and Dane are going to start, but Isaiah is being pushed by Quinn Clark and Keelan Smith. And you can see why it's Keelan Smith. I know Quinn Clark and even Jeremiah Jones, they have good intangibles, but I was really just impressed with Keelan's performance as a whole.
Yeah, Keelan was by far just the standout of the practice. Like, just the naked eye, that was the player that really just jumped out at you. He had multiple great routes. He was really good on the double move. He had a couple great plays on the one-on-one period that ended in touchdowns. So, yeah, he's a player that they were raving about him towards the end of last season as someone who could, potentially step up in the Pinstripe Bowl. That never happened, but he's definitely put in a good showing so far.
Yeah, I mean, you got to feel a lot better about this Nebraska receiving room. Then again, though, last year Nebraska was, I mean, people were expecting big things from Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nayer, so you almost have to take with a grain of salt. Yet I think a Dane Key of the world is, with all due respect to those other two, is a big improvement just because of his actual production with a more lackluster quarterback that he had than what, Jamal Banks had Sam Hartman, and Isaiah Nayer was getting thrown to by, well, I guess in Wyoming he was playing the Mountain West, but still.
But that was like years. He was injured at Texas both years.
Yeah.
So
No, and then another thing that of course, we got to see the tight ends. You definitely got, who your top three is. We saw them in groups. Lindenmeyer, of course, was the first out there, and then Harburg and Nelson. But they're all going to be playing a role. But I just can't believe the size of legs that Carter Nelson has on him now. And you can say the same for Heineck Harburg. He's definitely put on some weight too. But my gosh, does that dude a freak out there, Carter Nelson?
oh yeah, the whole tight end room is just huge. I mean, Luke Lindenmeyer's really just put on some good weight, and same with Harburg, switching from quarterback to tight end, and Carter Nelson. I mean, he just looks like a man amongst boys out there, and it's going to be very interesting to see how good to go. I mean, he was practicing on Saturday, but still recovering from that offseason hip surgery. But he's definitely a player who could make his mark in the Nebraska offense this year.
I don't know if I brought it up to you, but I was kind of thinking there could be a possibility where Nebraska they split out both Harburg and Nelson in the red zone, and they bring in a Keelan, or not, yeah, you could say a Keelan Smith, but I was thinking more a Quinn Clark. Could you imagine that size just for the go ball? I mean, that could create. Nebraska's had those problems of being effective in the red zone, and maybe that's what you look for now. But then we also got to see offensive line. I Teddy Prohaska was the right tackle for the first rep, which you can take that for however you want it. I mean, it's rule set at Big Ten Media Days. Tyler Knack would be the starter going into the first game if they had to decide that day. What was your take from what you saw, especially from the tackles?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting seeing Prohaska be the first guy out, but I really think that it's going to be by committee. I feel like even at Cincinnati, I can see that just being a game where you might throw Knack out there first, and if things aren't working out, put in a Teddy Prohaska and stuff like that. But it's just a very big group, and it's really kind of just show them a lot this year and showing the potential that they have. It's an old group, the whole offensive line, and it's definitely looking like could be a highlight for Nebraska.
Well, I'll tell you what, Elijah Pritchett's the real deal. I know I just was seeing him in drills, just watching him. I know their linebackers, he was pancaking, but still, I saw him once do it to Shavers. And I don't care what anybody says about size. That's still impressive to pancake Vince at Shavers in a drill. But yeah, you brought up that. I think it's a matter with Prohaska. I'd say he's always had probably some of the most talent on that offensive line. It's just a matter of being healthy and coming off, 3 knee surgeries that have ended his season before. That's where you really raise the question. We also found out Turner Corcoran, he's pretty close to being back. He might even be being, well, I would say maybe probably wasn't full go this week, but Rule said he was getting close. I mean, that offensive line, I think you got to feel good about. And I'd say it's arguably the best offensive line Nebraska's had in the last decade with talent wise.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, Rocco Spindler talked about how he thinks this O-line could win the Joe Moore Award and be the best in the country this year. And Lutovsky was talking about at media days. Rocco was saying that they're the most talented offensive line he's been with, and it's just all about piecing it together now and being a cohesive unit. And it definitely is something to look forward to as a Nebraska fan. Just in years past, O-line kind of has been very iffy, but we've seen just the strides they've taken year to year under Donovan Raiola, and this could definitely be their best one yet.
Yeah, and I think you look at last season and Nebraska would have even at Purdue they were averaging. I think at halftime they averaged around 2 yards. They were 2 yards a carry is what they had for an average. Then you look at when Holgerson took over, and then I think that if Nebraska can consistently block, I think it's going to really relieve these running backs. I think that'd be huge because, we know Emmett Johnson's the guy, probably going to get 15 to 18 touches a game, whether it's getting a carry or receiving it. But we got to see Mekhi Nelson looks to be the clear number 2. And then we also got to see Isaiah Mosey and Connor Booth, who I thought were both impressive.
Yeah, the running backs had a great practice, really everyone overall. Obviously, Quentin Ives was sidelined in the yellow jersey, which really puts him in kind of limbo going into these next couple weeks in the Cincinnati game, as he was definitely in there in that number 2 running back battle. But really, from what we've seen so far, is that Mekhi Nelson, Connor Booth, as you mentioned, and then Isaiah Mosey really haven't slowed down. They've all had great days on Saturday to go along with Emmett, who had a pretty good day as well.
Yeah, I was being a bit of a homer for Connor Booth, but I was impressed. I really was. I think Connor Booth, it reminded me of being 12 years old watching Rex Burkhead cut. I was impressed. I told you I think Connor Booth will get 40 to 50 carries by the end of the season total. I think he's going to play a role. And I think that I think he might be the guy that Nebraska goes to when it's 3rd and 1. I'm not sold on Quentin Ives, especially with the injury. So I think that's Connor Booth's deal. And then, of course, Mosey, we got to see him. And he looks like a natural runner out of the backfield. I mean, sometimes those receivers will go in there and they don't know how to hit the hole. But you saw Mosey, he can plant a foot and find a path.
Absolutely. Mosey, I think he'll be that 3rd down back. Johnson can definitely be that as well. He's shown that in the past. But just even throw them both in the backfield with Raiola and then just, let them play. Mosey, he's a guy who was a receiver in the spring, got great praise there, but realized, the receiver room is going to be packed. It's already great depth there. So moving to running back, and he's still going to find a home there. And it's just really promising to see this with your new players, with these true freshmen, that they can really play at multiple positions, and that really just shows how good the receiving room is and how valuable the running back room is now that one of them is there.
Yeah, you brought up one of my favorite formations in football. I mean, a split back, it's something that I really think we're going to see with Nebraska. Ben joined last week, and we were talking about that. You could even see a Harburg lineup in the back to run some crossbuck to kick out the end for an Emmett Johnson. But you think of the RPO possibilities if you have a Mosey in there and an Emmett Johnson in the backfield side by side. I mean, Raiola can read the end and either hand it to Johnson. He can have a split, your H-back being Harburg over as a wing, and he can either read that, go to Harburg, or he can hit Mosey in the flat. And I think that is a type of play that Dana Holgorsen will see. And I know we're not going to see a totally revamped offense, but I think those type of plays are something that we should expect with the RPO game.
Yeah, I agree. Just getting the ball out of Raiola's hands quick. I think really with last year when Holgorsen took over, that's where Raiola was playing his best football since non-conference play. Was just, they kind of simplified the offense to him, and they really introduced, getting the ball to the running back out of the backfield. Emmett Johnson, I think he averaged like 5 or 6 catches a game under Holgorsen, which is definitely an encouraging sign and shows you just the versatility he has. And then when you bring in a receiver turned running back in Mosey, could definitely lead to some hopefully explosive plays.
Well, I'm not going to really put you on the spot here, but are you sold on Emmett Johnson? I mean, he's put up good numbers, and you look at his numbers for his freshman and sophomore year, and you compare him to an Amir Abdullah or Burkhead, and they're pretty similar. But I don't know if he is going to be able to carry that on for the whole season. That's why I think that having these other young backs, I mean, especially if a Mekhi Nelson can give Nebraska 6 carries a game for 30 yards, that'll be huge.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely do have a little bit of questions with Emmett. This is a big load that he's going to be taking on that he just hasn't had for the past 2 years. But I think he's shown enough, and he's shown a lot that each time these last 2 years, where even if he hasn't started out as a starter, even if he's, gotten pushed in, he has proven to be Nebraska's best back. And he's proven to be, the most reliable guy there. I know Dowdell gave you 10 goal line touchdowns last year, but just for talking down the stretch, it's Emmett Johnson was making plays. He just really needs to, start making that next man miss. He's had so many plays that have been 15-yard gains, and then he gets tackled by the safety where they could have been, 30, 40, even touchdowns. So I think it's really up to him to just be making that one more man miss and being more just explosive after the first after getting past the line, just moving downfield in open field. That's where he's going to have to, take a next step, and that could really make him, a game changer and a 1,000-yard running back for Nebraska.
No, you prove a great point, and he even addressed that when he spoke. What day did he? I think he spoke on last Thursday, and he brought up, he said he's really working on hitting the home run. And then at the end of the scrimmage, or not scrimmage, but the practice, they were going 11 on 11, and you saw Emmett break one off for 75 yards. So that was a good sign to see, because I think Emmett's longest carries around 45, 50 yards during his time at Nebraska. But yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think that the talent's definitely there. Is it a matter of, is he going to produce that type of stat? I mean, it's a lot to ask out of Emmett Johnson, but I agree the talent is there. And we also, when we'll close out what we saw from the offense. I think that we kind of found a guy that we think that is the number 2 quarterback. But instead of Graham Statter, from my opinion, TJ Lateef looked good.
Yeah, Lateef had a great practice, and it was very interesting to see how they kind of divided even just the quarterback 3 reps. He had a lot more reps than Davila, and he really showed more than Gramstad. Gramstad, he looked good in the practice, but his throws were a lot of short, intermediate throws, whereas Lateef really had some great throws, especially in, the one-on-one period and the scrimmage as well. So I think it's going to be very interesting. Hopefully for Nebraska, they don't get into this predicament. But if Raiola goes down, who do you go with at quarterback? I know Gramstad's the veteran. He knows the playbook front to back. But if you really need a play, I think Latif is that guy you'd put in.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if Raiola sprains an ankle and needs to get it taped, you might go Gramstad, finish up the series. But if he's out for a game, I think you almost got a game plan around Latif. If Nebraska were playing a game and they were going in without Dylan Raiola, I'd almost think as of right now, TJ Latif's the guy. And I think it really helps you. We brought up and everybody's brought up Dana Holgerson's simplified offense. So I think a true freshman could handle that. I mean, Dylan Raiola handled basically the Bible of football plays, as big as it was last year. So, well, I shouldn't say handled, but he was out there trying to quarterback it. But any other things you saw from the offense that you want to talk about before we transition over to what we saw from the Black Shirts?
Yeah, I just think it was a great group. I think there's a lot of just talent in, everywhere around it. Corey Barney had a great practice as well. He had a ton of highlights there. He had a nice one-handed catch from Raiola in the one-on-one period. So there's definitely a lot to look forward to this season for Nebraska. And it really shows you that if Nebraska does get into this Latif, having to come in, or even Gramstad, they still have the skill players around them that could definitely help guide them through, Big Ten defenses and stuff like that.
No, I 100% agree. After watching Nebraska's offense last year at this scrimmage and everything, you saw him move the ball, but it wasn't near to the magnitude of what we saw in this practice. And I don't think that's a knock on the defense, because we got to see a lot from the defense. And I think that a Nebraska fan's got to feel really good about the back seven.
Oh yeah,
and I mean the D line's still a question. They're claiming that they're gonna be just as good, if not better, but still, I thought that the secondary and the linebacking core is extremely strong.
Yeah, the secondary. We heard yesterday at media availability from defensive backs coach Addison Williams, and he was just talking about really how much depth they have and how it's really there's a lot of just pressure on him picking out the 5 guys to roll out there. While it may be kind of obvious on paper, you have the 4 returning starters: Hartzog, Singleton, Buford, and Sayer, right? And then Andrew Marshall, the Idaho transfer, who's been going great. But there's also still a lot of players who are pushing for a spot. You mentioned Amari Sanders earlier. Donovan Jones is another guy who's made the switch from cornerback to safety, but he can really play wherever. And also Williams talked about yesterday just the transfer players. Justin Rhett from Georgia, I thought he had a great day at the open practice. He was a guy who I had my eye on. And then Jameer Khan, another FCS transfer. He's someone who was out for the spring, but ended up returning ahead of schedule on his injury recovery. So definitely a lot of people to look out for in that secondary.
Yeah, you mentioned Jameer Khan. We saw him playing the nickel role behind Hartzog as the number 2, but it makes a guy wonder if a defense starts to try to pick apart Hartzog, if that'll be Khan's who comes in. And I think that Jameer Khan could be, outside those top 5, the kind of the X factor of that group. And then you mentioned Donovan Jones too. I mean, that his versatility is incredible. He's pretty big. I know he ain't necessarily tall, but he's got weight on him. I think he's close to around 200 pounds or so. And you could almost put him in, let's say, Singleton goes down. I think that you could almost slide in Donovan Jones into that rover type role.
Yeah, I agree. He's definitely put on some muscle weight since we saw him in the Pinstripe Bowl, where he came in really out of nowhere and kind of held it down at corner that game. So it's just very interesting to see how they use them. Williams was talking about Singleton and Jones as kind of these guys who could really play all over the field, and it's going to be very interesting to see who's going to be at rover, who's going to be at that spot that Isaac Gifford was at last year, and just see who really is the toughest guy in the secondary.
Yeah, now we did see in the one-on-ones, there were some linebackers that did sort of struggle. I mean, kind of Jacob Bauer looked good in the run fits, but you can tell his speed ain't up to par. So it seems like he'll be kind of maybe a guy that comes in when he does for maybe run downs. But of course, the first two linebackers we saw, we didn't even see Shavers out on the field. It was Javen Wright and Marquise Watson Trent. But of course, Shavers, I thought, outplayed them all in practice.
Oh yeah, Shavers had a great day Saturday. He's another guy who looks the part as a linebacker for sure, and it really just shows you this linebacking room with guys like Javen Wright, Marquise Watson, Trent, Willis McGahee as pass rusher as an edge. Just a lot of great players there that can really do it all. At least with Javen Wright and Trent and Shavers, those are guys who you can ask them to cover a tight end in the flat or to go after the quarterback if they need to.
Yeah, I wonder, which they won't tell us if we ask them, but I think that Willis McGahee could be a guy that could play at the jack or even slide on the inside with his speed. He's one of the fastest guys on the football team, and I think that you very well could see Deshaun McCullough and Willis McGahee on the field at the same time. And then Rule praised Jordan Ochoa before the practice, and then I watched him specifically for a couple of drills, and I saw him beating Pritchett off the edge. Which I know if people are going to counter that, thinking about how many quarterback hurries he gave up at Alabama last year, but still, I think they got 3 jacks that can legitimately play, and we still don't know about the Dawson Merritts and the Christian Joneses if they're going to work into that role or if they might try to do the 4-game thing, but those 2 are still guys to watch.
Yeah, for sure. Dawson Merritt had an interesting practice Saturday as well. He's definitely has the talent that he could avoid that red shirt and then play right away. It's just a matter of if they'll really need him and if he's able to, prove himself as a guy like Shavers or McGahee was last year that can burn the red shirt for and have him play every game. But yeah, I didn't even mention McCullough in the jack linebacker discussion, and it's just going to be very interesting. You have a lot of guys who can really get to the quarterback, and Jordan Ochoa, another guy, Rule said he wouldn't sleep on him. So just a lot of, guys stepping up when their numbers call.
Yeah, I mean, and someone asked, I can't remember who it was, Butler, about the ideal guys that he wants to play. And Butler wasn't given an answer to that. He said he wants to play as many that are ready, basically. I'm paraphrasing that. But and then you look at the D-line. Arguably the biggest question, that and running back headed into Arrowhead. But we got to hear from 2 defensive linemen, and Butler was praising them yesterday. They're confident, brought that up. I thought Riley Van Poppel, and he said, we're going to shock the world. I mean, every press conference when a player comes in, they're saying they're going to lead the nation in something. So then that's just the nature of fall camp. People are confident. But I think we know who the top 5 are going to be, and then Jalen George, if he's healthy, will probably be number 6. That's why I was curious to ask Van Poppel, just about some of the guys like Ashton Murphy, Dylan Parrott. And I know Dylan Parrott saw a little bit of a role in the Pinstripe Bowl. But what's your kind of outlook from what you've seen from the D-line?
Yeah, it's a big question mark going into next year, but just hearing, John Butler talk about it, and of course Van Poppel and then Elijah Judy yesterday, I really like just their mindset. They're really they have the passion and commitment of kind of just proving the doubters wrong. And I like how they understand that, there's not a Ty Robinson or Nas Hutmacher in that room. They're not going to try to make anyone, try to play like them. Just they're going to play their own collective football, which I think could be a very good unit. I really like Keona Davis. I remember the screen pass against USC last year where he was able to chase the guy down and prevent a big gain. That showed me a lot, and that was just him as a true freshman, and now he's, has a year in the program and stuff like that. And then Cam Lenhart's another guy who I'm very confident in. He's been with the team for 3 years now, and I think this could definitely be a year where he has kind of his breakout.
Yeah, you bring up Cam Lenhart. We saw him play more as a freshman than we did last season. Yeah. And he's definitely got the size and intangibles. So I agree. I'd pencil him in as the day one starter. When we saw him go out with the first unit, we actually saw Judy at the nose and then Lenhart and Davis as your ends. But I'm intrigued by it. I was blanking where I was going with that. But, Williams Nwaneri is something, everybody's been talking about him. And we've had I believe Rule said it, and Butler did say it yesterday. They said he's gonna play. So the talk of him, kind of easing in, I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to be able to get 20 to 25 snaps out of him. I'd assume probably third down packages with a pass rush. But my gosh, is that dude? I mentioned it last week. He's a freak, and I just don't. Sometimes I question his effort from my perspective.
Yeah, it's deserving, I think. I mean, he's a guy who could very well be the most talented guy on the whole roster. I mean, five-star recruit, top 10 recruit in the country coming out of high school, redshirted at Missouri last year, and now he's at Nebraska. He's got time. He's got the potential to be an absolute star for Nebraska. He's got 4 years if he wants it, but he's just a guy who I think should definitely be, pushing Lenhart and pushing just these starters for playing time right away. And it's just going to be very interesting to see, how he plays out. I'm sure after the Cincinnati game, depending on how much or how little he plays, there's going to be some overreactions to that, but he's definitely a player to watch.
Yeah, I still think there's going to be a package where you see 4 actual D linemen down, right,
Yeah.
with a jack on the field, with a 5-man rush. I think that I'm not saying that's going to be their base defense. I know they're probably going to stick with the 3-3-5 or hybrid defense, whatever you want to call it. But I agree. Well, let's transition for a minute and talk about what we saw from the specialists, because we got to see some field goal kickers, and then we got to see Archie Wilson, who is pretty intriguing punting that football. I guess just give me your thoughts on Archie from what you saw.
Yeah, just very interesting. We saw him roll out to the right and kick with the right. We saw him roll out to the left and kick with the left. And yeah, just going to be just something that we've never really seen from Nebraska's punt unit. It's going to be very interesting. Obviously, Mike Eckler at Tennessee had consistently one of the top punt return and punting units in the country. So definitely a lot to be excited for. And yeah, Archie Wilson looked the part. Something again I've never really seen a punter do at Nebraska, and that was just watching him practice punting.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't look like a punter. He looks like a guy you could line up as a linebacker.
Dude.
Big dude, what you played rugby, and but you definitely got a sense of that. He's clearly the punter. With all due respect to Camden Cook, I saw him practicing to do some of that rugby stuff, and I'm thinking, yeah, that's not really his forte. And then, but the kicking. We saw Nebraska kickers kick, I believe, up to about a 45-yard field goal, and we got to see Kyle Cunanan kick the first one, then John Holfall, and then Tristan Albano, and none of them missed.
Yeah, that's definitely something to look forward to as a Nebraska fan in that period. No one missed their kicks, but it was very interesting to see, who got those kicks. I mean, Alvano only had one kick in that whole practice, so really kind of shows where he's at, and it just looks like a battle between Cunanan and John Hull for that starting spot right now, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it shapes out. John Hull obviously had his struggles last year, but really got better as the season went on. And I really do think a lot of his struggles came from the long snapping, as we've really seen, just especially in that Purdue game, just bad snap after bad snap. So now that they got a guy like Kevin Gallick in at long snapper, should be better a procedure going up to that kick. So it's going to be very interesting.
That's how I should have started the topic of kickers, is that we didn't see any long snaps that were bounced over the holder's hands. And I mean, we did see Camden Cook and Jalen Gramstad both being the holders, but yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of people have said, whether it's a fan, a media member, whatever, that Nebraska would probably have won another game or two if they would have been consistent with special teams. And you definitely, the special teams, you can definitely see, I'd say that's probably the biggest improvement I've actually seen over the offense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, even just hearing from the guys, and then we got to see a little bit at practice who was back there returning punts. And I like how, Ja'Cory Barney was saying he's going to lead the nation in punt return yards. Andrew Marshall is a guy who also was really excited to be a punt returner or kick returner, and he's had his success at Idaho returning kicks. And it's just going to be very drastic change from last year, even the last couple years where, I mean, we would just have or Nebraska would just have Isaiah Garcia Castaneda out there just to fair catch the ball, make sure no muffs happen. Now it looks like Nebraska is actually going to go to return these kicks and try to get some more yards to help their offense out.
It worked out all well until Iowa for Garcia
I know.
Castaneda.
Yeah.
Gosh, I actually don't think Iowa wound up scoring on that drive. I'm pretty sure the Blackshirts held them, or they might have got a field goal.
They got a field goal out of
They
it.
got a field goal, but yeah, I mean, punt returning, kick returning, you can fair catch it and start at 25, and analytically, you're arguably better. But how many times have over the past 7-8 years have we seen, or ever since JD Spielman left Nebraska, have we seen a kick return or punt returner fair catch the ball at the 5 and let it bounce when it's at the 20 and roll to the 5? I mean, every season you see that at least 2 times in 2 games.
Yeah, I remember a couple seasons ago, we would roll out, or Nebraska would roll out a pretty much injured Billy Kemp out there just to fair catch punts so that they don't muff it. And in response, he'd fair catch and he'd have at least 10 yards of open field in front of him that he just wasn't attacking. So
yeah, you brought up that. That was I think it was at Michigan State.
Yeah,
He only went out there to catch punts for that game because he was so beat up. But yeah, I think it's crucial. And if I were a football coach, I'd almost rather have a guy that's gonna muff it 1 out of 20 times, but get me 7-8 yards every punt return on the other 19 than a guy that's gonna fair catch it, because that field position is so critical. I mean, getting close to another first down off your drive is critical, especially in the Big Ten. Iowa does it every year, and they beat teams like Nebraska that have struggled with that every season.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Iowa, their offense hasn't been the greatest thing ever. They've been one of the worst in the Big Ten every single year, but they still win these games because of how valuable their return unit is. And you mentioned that, especially in the Big Ten, drives are at a premium in the Big Ten level. You're not getting as many drives a game as you are in, say, the Big 12 or any conference like that. So that just shows how necessary just getting an extra 10 yards could be on a punt return.
Yeah, well, I'll hold too much of the Cincinnati preview for another show. But when you think about the Nebraska-Cincinnati game, I do not think that offense will necessarily look the same than what you'll see against Michigan, just because of the amount of possessions Nebraska is going to have. I mean, I think that Cincinnati game is going to be where one team might score 25 and another 35.
Yeah.
Versus, Big Ten is going to be probably 2 less possessions per each team.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see, how ready Nebraska's offense is. We've seen them at these practices. We've heard about them. They look the part. It's just a matter of if they can actually perform out there against, Cincinnati to start the year. And then how would that transition to when you're playing these tough Big Ten defenses?
Yeah. Well, let's close out the show with something fun. I was kind of thinking, what does this team kind of remind you of a recent Nebraska team? And then maybe some players where you can kind of see a connection to.
See, I know you told me about this, and I've still been kind of, drawing blanks at this. But I can see, this defense kind of going back to long ways away. But 2016 Nebraska, I can see maybe their secondary kind of performing like that unit. I mean, Deshaun Singleton, I know, talked about it, I think last week, or might have been some guy else, but just about making more explosive plays and forcing turnovers on the defense, which it's been a long time since really Nebraska's had a consistent unit with interceptions. 2016 was kind of that year. I remember Kyron Williams, of all people, is the last Cornhusker to get 5 interceptions in a season. So I can definitely see, especially with these guys like Hartzog had 4 last year. I know he's not the best in coverage, but he can definitely the ball. And Sayer Wright is another guy who I can definitely see, grabbing a few picks.
Yeah, no, I kind of bring him up a little bit too much, but every time I just watch this team perform and just the kind of the tempo of the offense, the personnel, the size, like even the tight end position, it reminds me of a Bo Pelini type team that kind of when Nebraska entered the Big Ten. I know it's a different game than over a decade ago, but you look at the tight ends. I mean, Heinrich Harburg as a tight end reminds me of Kyler Reed.
I like that.
I see that. I see that because Kyler Reed was a kind of a receiving tight end. He underperformed a bit at Nebraska, but he was fast and stuff. And that's kind of what reminds me of Harburg. And then on the defensive side, I mean, this one's pretty obvious, but Vincent Shavers just got that aggressive of a Levante David type role he can play. And I mentioned Connor Booth. I've been kind of hyping him up probably a little too much, but he reminds me of Burkhead out of the backfield.
He's a hard runner. He showed that on Saturday.
I hope it ages well because he probably be to the end of the season will have 5 carries. Hopefully it ain't as bad as my Kale Frost prediction. But anyway, last remarks for you, Anthony?
This was fun being on this show. Thank you for having me on, and I'm super excited to be on some more times this year.
Yeah, no, yeah. Once again, shoot Anthony a follow on Twitter and stay up with his and I coverage for the football season. He's also going to be covering, I believe, some Nebraska volleyball too.
Yes, sir.
So
check that out.
Stay tuned. Yes. So thank you all for listening, and we'll be back next week.